wrestling fans, we are all, rather regrettably, used to seeing our heroes die, and all too often, die young. It's a tough part of the business to come to terms with, although thankfully things have gotten a lot better in recent years. For a time, however, bone benders were dropping at a frankly alarming rate, more often than not the result of substance abuse or other health issues resulting from excessive use of drugs and/or alcohol. The job is physically demanding, and the money and notoriety afforded to those that succeed in it, a life in the fast lane, in many instances have led to a tragic end. On occasion, mind you, the death of a wrestler jumps out as especially mysterious, even for an industry that has been plagued with ones that are hard to make sense out of. So I'm going to take a break from knob jokes for just a little while, because it's important to remember those wrestlers that we lost in weird, bizarre, mystifying, or otherwise unexplained ways. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are 10 mysterious wrestler deaths. Join us. Number 10, Art Barr. Art Barr would have likely been a much bigger name had a nefarious past not kept him out of work in the United States. Art, the son of wrestler and promoter Sandy Barr, gained popularity as Beetlejuice, a gimmick based off the title character from the Tim Burton film of the same name. Local attention stemming from some legal trouble kept him out of Oregon, but he ended up in WCW as the Juicer until his previous indiscretions came back to haunt him and he was let go from there too. With the US of A out of the question, Barr relocated to Mexico where he found his greatest fame as Love Machine, teaming with Eddie Guerrero to form the sensational Los Gringos Locos. He was a top star, but also missed his family and friends, and to lessen the feelings of homesickness, began abusing drugs and alcohol. His stateside break looked to be on the horizon, and the plan was for he and Guerrero to wrestle in ECW. He never worked for Paul Heyman, however, as he passed away on November 23, 1994 at the age of 28, before he could debut. Initial reports claimed an aneurysm or heart failure as the cause, while some outlets cited a drug overdose. While he did have drugs and alcohol in his system at the time, the cause of his death was officially ruled as unknown circumstances. Number 9, Steve Bradley. Though he didn't make it to WWE TV as a member of the main roster, Steve Bradley was well known to those within the company. A standout in development leagues like Memphis Power Pro and Ohio Valley Wrestling, Bradley was one of a number of talents that seemed to be forever on the cusp of a call-up. It never arrived, though Bradley did work non-televised dark matches and appear as an extra on WWE programming. His biggest accomplishment was arguably his Power Pro program with Kurt Angle over the group's heavyweight title, which won Underrated Feud of the Year in the 1999 Wrestling Observer Awards. The Olympic hero even thanked Bradley during his 2017 Hall of Fame induction speech, citing him as an unsung hero. Bradley was also a 3-time HWA Tag Team Champion with Val Venus and Lance Cade, and was helping book OVW when he was released in July of 2002. Post-OVW, Bradley ran the Wrestling Federation of America promotion and opened the Top Rope Wrestling Academy training school. Years of wrestling and a chronic knee injury had left him in serious pain and, sadly, addicted to heroin. Tragically, he was found passed away in his parents' stolen car on December 8, 2008, in a parking lot across the street from the school he used to run. He was just 32 years old. There were no witnesses, and the cause of death remains undetermined. Number 8, Gino Hernandez. With his dashing good looks and long black hair, Gino Hernandez could have done very well for himself as a pretty boy babyface in the Southern territories he worked in the 70s and 80s. As a heel though, he was on another level, especially when matched with the beloved Von Erich brothers in the Texas-based world-class championship wrestling. Teaming with Gentleman Chris Adams, another wrestler who died in odd circumstances when he was shot and killed by a former friend, Gino had no trouble riling up sportatorium crowds as he antagonized Fritz's boys. The handsome half-breed, as he was known, won many titles and drew big business and television ratings, especially when partnering with Adams, the other half of the so-called dynamic duo. But, like many a young wrestler, the fame and fortune came at a cost. It's no secret that the world-class territory was rife with substance abuse and scandal, and Hernandez inevitably went down the wrong path. After uncharacteristically no-showing a scheduled house show appearance, WCCW officials and police officers broke into his apartment, where they discovered his body on February 2nd, 1986. He was just 28 years old. Hernandez had been deceased for several days, and it was initially thought to have been a homicide, though ultimately ruled a drug overdose. Skepticism remains though, and many who were close to him still maintain that foul play was involved. Number 7. David Von Erich. The Von Erich family is the most tragic in wrestling history. For all of their success, the Von Erichs suffered massively, with 5 of Father Fritz's 6 sons passing away before he did in 1997. Of all the Von Erich boys, David was viewed to have the most potential. Dubbed the Yellow Rose of Texas, David was a young heartthrob and regularly challenged for the NWA heavyweight title, taking on Harley Race and Ric Flair in losing efforts. In late 1983, it was believed that David might be due to win the big one as he engaged in an intense personal rivalry with the Nature Boy. The title bout was scheduled to take place sometime in April of 1984, but it never happened. David was found dead in a Tokyo hotel room in February of that year while on tour with All Japan Pro Wrestling. He was also just 28 years old. Rumors ran wild in the aftermath, with much speculation surrounding the circumstances of his passing. While the official cause of death is listed as ruptured intestines due to acute enteritis, most believe it was due to either a heart attack or a drug overdose, with Flair claiming in his autobiography that Bruiser Brody helped remove evidence in order to cover an OD up. David's brother Kerry later beat Flair to win the NWA heavyweight title in his honor. Number 6. The Jimenez Brothers. Luchadors with dwarfism, prostitutes, robbery, and a fatal drug overdose. Sounds like the plot of a really bad book that I definitely want to read, but unfortunately, it's the very true and tragic tale of 2 popular wrestlers. The Jimenez brothers were twins who competed as minis in Mexico and beyond. Known in their homeland as Espacrito 2 and La Parquita, one of the brothers, Alejandro, also showed up in WWE for a spell in the late 90s, performing as Tarantula and Mini Mankind. Alejandro and his brother Alberto were both found dead on June 29, 2009 at the age of 35. After working a show, they were escorted back to a Mexico City hotel room by 2 ladies of the night. One was 65 years old and the other was referred to as the fat one by police, just to make the story a little more colourful. While in the hotel room, the women put eye drops in the luchadors' drinks in a bid to sedate them before robbing them. But they failed to take their victim's small stature into account, and the dose ended up killing them. The sordid details of the case brought worldwide attention, and a year later, both women were convicted and sentenced to 47 years in prison for their crimes. A film depicting the events was released in 2015. Number 5. Lafayera. More bad stuff in Mexico now with the murky case of Lafayera. It's a name that likely won't be familiar to most, and that's something of a shame because in his day, Lafayera was one hell of a professional wrestler, widely considered one of, if not the best luchador of the early 1980s. He worked predominantly in Mexico, but also enjoyed success in Japan, where he was handpicked to be the first opponent for Tiger Mask 2, portrayed by the legendary Mitsuharu Misawa. A gifted high flyer and technician inside the squared circle, Lafayera's biggest contribution to the business may have been the invention of the frog splash, which he used regularly in the 1980s and was adopted by Eddie Guerrero and then Art Barr and then a million others. The former NWA middleweight champion was involved in some shady stuff though, and clearly ran with a very bad crowd. Semi-retired from the business, Lafayera was heavily involved with hard drugs toward the end of his life, having previously served a prison sentence in the 90s for dealing. Not much is known about his demise other than he was mugged, assaulted, and stabbed 5 times and left for dead, eventually succumbing to his injuries in a Mexico City hospital on September 10, 2010 at the age of 49. No one has ever been charged with the crime. Number 4. Rikidozan. Known as the father of Puro Resu in the land of the rising sun, Rikidozan was responsible for popularizing the sport of professional wrestling in Japan. He established himself a star and a national hero by beating American wrestlers, including the legendary Lou Thesz, who he defeated to become NWA International Heavyweight Champion in 1958. His bouts drew enormous crowds to arenas and were watched by record-setting amounts of people on television, but all good things must come to an end, and in his later days, Rikidozan developed a reputation for being a bit of a hellraiser. On December 8, 1963, Rikidozan was out partying in Tokyo and got into an altercation with a Yakuza member, which resulted in a scuffle and ended with Rikidozan getting stabbed in the abdomen. Surgery on the injury was successful, but the star's drinking made his condition deteriorate, and despite a second surgery, he passed away from peritonitis a week after the initial incident. He was 39 years old. The Yakuza member served 8 years for manslaughter and, showing remorse for his actions, visited Rikidozan's grave every year on the anniversary of his passing, as well as apologizing to the wrestler's sons. Number 3. Abysmo Negro. The bizarre death of Abysmo Negro stunned the world of lucha libre. While we've already looked at some examples of wrestlers from south of the border passing on in mysterious circumstances, examples of such deaths are few and far between, and even by wrestling standards, his was an odd one. Abysmo Negro had been a star in his homeland since the early 90s and was a AAA mainstay and main eventer known for his brutal tombstone piledriver, the most devastating move in Mexico. He also worked a handful of matches for WWE in 1997 and turned up for TNA in 2004. Like many before and after him, he suffered from drug addiction issues, which ultimately hampered his career as they affected his behavior. Hirings, firings, rehab, no-shows, comebacks, and disappearances marred his final years. On March 22, 2009, Negro was found lying face down in a river in the small town of El Rosario. He'd been traveling on a bus some 12 hours earlier when he reportedly suffered a panic attack and threatened the reluctant driver to let him out in the middle of nowhere. He informed his wife via text message that he was lost, while the concerned bus driver informed the authorities, who subsequently found him. He was 37. The official cause of death is asphyxiation via drowning, but nobody really knows what happened to him once he got off that bus. Number 2. Ricky Lawless. Ricky Lawless wasn't a big name nationally, but he was well known on the Mid-Atlantic independent circuit in the 80s and was the inaugural American Wrestling Federation heavyweight champion. Though moderately successful himself, Lawless was more well known for training others who would go on to greater fame, such as Axel Rotten and Joey Maggs at his wrestling school. Outside of the ring, Lawless was a known party animal who perhaps didn't always make the wisest decisions. He was found shot to death on November 30th, 1988 in Baltimore, Maryland. He was only 28 years old. The Toronto Star newspaper erroneously reported that Lawless had been killed by a former tag partner named Vladimir Koloff, but it was later discovered that the perpetrator was a man called Raymond Swartz. Swartz had been motivated by the fact that Lawless had been having an affair with his wife. The story gained more notoriety when Hustler magazine published a piece on it in 1991 entitled "Shotgun Justice: A Pro Wrestler's Final Fall." Number 1. Dino Bravo. Dino Bravo was one of the top stars in the Montreal territory in the 1970s and 80s, but with that good time having run its course and WWE's impending global domination on the horizon, he joined up with Vince McMahon's outfit. Nicknamed the world's strongest man, Bravo was a solid heel and had a decent run with Titan Sports. He didn't win any titles, but he was involved in some notable feuds with the likes of Hacksaw Jim Duggan and The Ultimate Warrior. Dino was phased out as the years went on, however, getting pushed further down the card and eventually losing more than he was winning. He left WWE in April of 1992 and subsequently retired. But with no other real skills or experience outside of wrestling, and used to the lavish lifestyle his vocation had afforded him and his family, he turned to organized crime in order to make payments, getting involved in illegal cigarette smuggling in Canada. This dalliance would lead to his downfall, and he was found dead in his home on March 10th, 1993, shot 17 times. He was 44 years old. His homicide has never been solved, but it has been said that Bravo knew his days were numbered, and the common belief is that the perpetrator was likely someone he knew.